Welcome back, boys. This is episode 8 for you guys. I promised this a couple of weeks ago, and I had inspiration for last week's episode about men and friendships that I wanted to publish first. So here we go. I want to talk about something that almost every divorced or separating man in his 40s and 50s has in private struggled to make sense of. And I think this is a conversation that men might have with one another if they're divorced men, but I'm not sure how vulnerable most men are being in discussing this. We're going to talk about, for those men who were left by their wife the day she told you, and the moment that the world started reorganizing itself around a sentence that you didn't see coming, said by a person you had slept next to for many, many years. Maybe she was calm. Maybe she'd been crying for an hour before she said it. Maybe it was said in the heat of the moment. Maybe she said it gently. Or maybe she had been planning it and she sat across the kitchen table with her keys on the counter, already ready to walk out the door. Whatever the choreography, the experience for a striking number of men that I talk with is the same. They say, I didn't see it coming. I think if you spoke to many of the women on the other side, they'd say, how's that possible? And on the other side of this sentence, like almost always, a woman insists or is insisting with conviction that she had been telling you for years. I would be on that same side with those same women in my situation. And my ex-husband would say he was blindsided. So today I want to look at, exactly how both of these things can be true at the same time. And like many of the things that I talk about here on the podcast, I'm curious about this. So I go out into the world and research and see what other people are saying and look for studies to support whatever it is that I'm going to then come back and report to you. This is definitely something I'm curious about. At the time of my divorce, at the time I told my husband I was leaving and he was blindsided, I was like, that's ridiculous. And of course he knew. But now, because I hear it over and over and over again, both with the women that I work with who say they're blindsided, this is ridiculous, and with the men who come to me to work through their divorce, they're saying, I was completely blindsided. I had no idea. So let's talk about the facts because I think they matter. And I think it's important to understand this. I am going to be coming at this for the men, but this is definitely an episode that men and women could benefit from listening to. In the United States, somewhere around 65 to 75% of divorces are initiated by women. That's why this conversation is so important. The number climbs higher in the demographic every year, all right? The playlist for this, the over 40s, over 50s, gray divorce category, where the figure gets up to like 70%. Gray divorce after 50, has roughly doubled since the 90s, and the vast majority of those filings come from wives. The popular literature sometimes calls this the walk-away wife phenomenon, and I want to use that term carefully because in the manosphere, it's become a slur, a way of saying that women in midlife are suddenly capriciously leaving their husbands, and that's not what the research describes. What the research describes is a woman who has been quietly working on this decision for many, many years, who has tried to communicate it, who's often tried therapy by herself and couples, and finally arrives at the conversation already done. By the time she says those words, I want a divorce, She's already made the decision. She's done. And she's been done for a while. She's been done long enough to be planning and figuring out how she's going to survive, where she's going to go. So she's not going to be announcing the start of the process. She's announcing at the end of her process. And she's already prepared to walk away, meaning she's probably met with an attorney. She's talking to her friends. Maybe she's hired a divorce coach or someone like me. Many, many, many women come to me while they're still married, when they're trying to figure this out. It's why I created something called The Quiet Untangling. It's a podcast for women to help them decide if they want to stay or they want to go, and just give them the facts of what going will look like and what staying can look like in a positive way. A lot of women are downloading those episodes. A lot of women are signing up for that private podcast. There's a reason. They don't know what to do. And they're not leaving and then figuring it out. They're figuring out, how do I stay or how do I go? What does that process look like? And what am I stepping into? They're going to start planning ahead of time. We all do. We all do. I started taking my Florida bar CEUs in family law well before my divorce. I thought, well, I know this is coming. I know it's going to happen. I should understand the law. And so I did my CEUs in that. That was just part of the step, or the steps that I took in preparation, but I was thinking about it for years. I also thought we had had multiple conversations where I had said, this isn't working. Why are we doing this? But here's the part that I want every man listening to this and saying, ugh, Leslie, you were one of them. I want you to know that what I'm saying doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It also doesn't mean that you did nothing wrong. It means that something specific happened in the architecture of the marriage that nearly every man in your demographic missed. So today we're going to look at exactly what it was. And I think this is important because you're probably going to get married again. Statistically speaking, chances are high you're going to do this again. So understanding what you missed in the first time is important. It also might help you heal if you're still in the grieving process, to understand what was happening that you might not have realized in the moment. So today we're going to look at exactly what it was and exactly why so many of you missed it, with as much respect for both sides and being as neutral as possible as I can be, okay? There are 5 things underneath this word and this phenomenon of blindsiding. I'm going to walk you through each one. In my research, these are the things I found. So I'm reporting back to you. The first is what I call the complaint decision asymmetry. Women in this demographic typically spend years, sometimes a decade or more, expressing dissatisfaction before making the decision to leave. They complain, they cry, they suggest counseling, they send articles, they ask for changes that do not arrive. And then at some point, often quietly, they shift from complaining to deciding. And the complaining stops. To the man across from her, that looks like things have finally calmed down. Like she got over it. Like the issue resolved itself. Perfect. To her internally, it's the sound of giving up. It could look like her losing herself, or it could look like her starting to prepare to leave. The complaining stops because she has stopped believing that the conversation will change anything. The end of her complaints is almost never the end of her unhappiness. It's the beginning of her grief work, done privately, that will end maybe 18 months later in the sentence you didn't see coming. This is when the women are looking for someone like me to help them make a decision to stay or go. It also could be when men come looking. This is not exclusive to women, but I researched women and how they start the process of knowing they want to leave. Most men misread the silence as peace. It was, in fact, the loudest signal that she ever sent. And it was the one most likely to be missed because silence does not announce itself the way conflict does. And it doesn't get a reaction in most cases. So for men in their first marriage especially, they really are clueless. She's being quiet. She's not complaining. Things must be better. That makes sense that that's the interpretation they would have. The second is selective hearing built on attachment style. This is uncomfortable to name, but it's true. An avoidant nervous system, which is an enormous percentage of men in the demographic that we're operating from, for reasons we covered in episode 4, do not register chronic low-grade emotional input the same way other nervous systems do. They register acute alarms, not slow dissatisfaction. So years of I'm not happy do not land as a warning, they land as background noise. The avoidance system is calibrated to notice fires, right? Not the slow rising of water. By the time the water reaches your chin, you're surprised, even though it's been rising for decades. This is not a moral failure. It's a wiring fact, but it has consequences. And one of them is that what feels like out of nowhere to an avoidant man was often a 6-year process of escalating signal that his nervous system was filtering as noise. The third is very different. It's the script in your head about what marriage looked like when it was working. Most men in these generations were raised inside a particular cultural template. The template said, if she's still here, still in bed, still cooking on Sundays, still posting the family photos, the marriage is fine. The structure of the thing was treated as a substance of the thing. The functioning was treated as the feeling. So as long as the daily life held together, the relationship was assumed to be holding too. Most men's check-in on the marriage was, in effect, a check-in of logistics. As long as the logistics ran, the marriage was working. What the men of this generation were rarely taught to do was ask a separate question. Not, how are the kids? Not, how was your day? How are we? How are you inside this thing we built? Many men didn't have an instrument for that question. No. How are you inside this thing we built? Many men did not have an instrument for that question because they never saw one used. Their fathers didn't ask their mothers. Friends did not ask each other's wives. The question was not part of the vocabulary or part of the culture. Without that infrastructure, slow drift is undetectable. Two people can be in the same bed for 15 years, and one of them can be quietly leaving the marriage in her interior, while the other one was filing every Sunday dinner was fine. And there was nothing going on. Nothing was wrong. The fourth one in the list is hard to say, and I'm going to say it very gently because I respect the men listening too much to dress it up in fancy clothes. Many of you did hear it. You heard the complaints. You heard the unhappiness. You heard the request for therapy. You might have even been begged for therapy. Or maybe there were comments about feeling lonely or questions about whether you were happy. The hearing happened, the taking seriously didn't. And there's a difference. And it really matters. It really matters to women and wives. Hearing is the body registering the sound, the noise coming in. Taking it seriously is the body changing its behavior in response to that sound, taking action that she needed to see. Many men of your generation were trained to do the first without doing the second, to absorb the complaint, to not get defensive, to say something reassuring, to agree to something, then to file that complaint as passing weather that didn't require any difference in the way you were living. Your wife noticed that you heard her. She may have even felt reassured, but she also noticed that the hearing changed nothing or the change was short term. Over years, she stopped bringing things to you because bringing things to you was an act of hope that had stopped paying off. It did nothing, and she had to endure a long, uncomfortable conversation only for that to result in no change. The drift between you was not built out of conflict. It was built out of unmet hope. Let that sit for a minute. You had the conversation. She told you how she was feeling. She told you she wanted things to change, and you said they would, and she got hopeful. And then nothing changed. And then it happened again, and nothing changed. I want to be really careful with this point because it's definitely a source of pain for myself, because I remember that woman so desperately wanting something to change and so hopeful. I am naturally a hopeful person and optimistic. I don't want this to land as blame. I want to paint a picture so you understand. The men who did this, who just agreed and said, okay, things will change, and didn't change, it wasn't malicious. Most were doing exactly what they've been taught a husband does. Absorb the complaint, smooth the surface, keep the structure intact. The cultural script didn't include the step where you change in response to what you heard. So a great many of you executed the script perfectly. You even made your wife feel good in that moment. But then the wife left you anyway, because the script was never actually a marriage. It was a maintenance plan for a marriage that was quietly emptying out. And women decide they don't want that anymore. They don't want an empty marriage. The fifth thing we'll talk about is called grief asymmetry. By the time she tells you she has cried in cars and on phone calls with her friends and her sister and at therapy appointments that she might not even have told you she was going to, she's imagined leaving so many times that the leaving is almost familiar by the time she does it. She's imagined it over and over and over again. She arrives at the conversation calm because she's already been on the other side of this conversation, and she's already been doing her grieving. You, on the other hand, are still inside the marriage in your interior. You're still operating on the assumption that the structure of the marriage has substance. So your grief hasn't started yet. Hers is almost finished. When two people in radically different stages of grief about the same loss meet in the kitchen, the calm one ends up looking cold, and the disoriented one looks shocked. Neither of them is doing it wrong. They're simply at different points in the same process. And the way this comes off is she felt nothing. She just discarded me. No, she has been grieving. She has been feeling. She has already cried and cried and cried and tried to problem solve her way into any other solution than this one. So, what do you do with all this, and why did I make this episode? If you're listening to this and you're recognizing yourself in some or all, maybe all 5 of these things, first, take the recognition without shame. I don't want you to shame yourself. Recognition and awareness is information. Shame leads to paralysis. So the men, you can look at what happened with curiosity rather than self-flagellation, are the men who actually integrate it and do something different. The ones who collapse into shame just rebuild the same dynamic with the next woman dressed up in apology. Second, grieve. The grief you did not get to do during the marriage because you didn't know yet that it was going to be grieved is yours to do now. The structure is gone. The story you told yourself about the 60s is gone. The version of you who was inside the marriage is gone. All of that needs to be felt. Episode 6, the anger one, is about exactly that work. So if you haven't watched it, it's worth listening to. There's so much good information in that episode, and there's so much truth. And what I've realized since creating that episode and watching it a couple times and getting feedback from people is that when there's anger present for men, so often there's grief underneath and other emotions that men don't typically allow themselves to deal with or feel. So if this is resonating and bringing some things up for you, please go back and watch episode 6 about anger. And episode 7 is helpful too. It's about not having the friends in place, the scaffolding and the structure of friends, because of the way men form friendships. They tend to not be emotionally supportive. And especially in this 40s, 50s, and 60s demographic. So there may be work in going out and finding new friends and finding support and support groups. If you haven't heard those 2 episodes, go back and check them out. These 3 episodes all go together, and they could really be listened to in any order. Third, and this one is for the men still inside the marriage. This is one of the most useful conversations you will ever have. Ask your wife the separate question, not how the kids are, not how the day was, not how the house is. How are you inside this thing that we built? And then this is the part the script never includes. Listen with the willingness to actually change something about the way you're living in response to what she says. Do you have to do exactly what she says? No, but there are always compromises. Always. Hearing is not enough. If she's asking for more intimacy, that doesn't have to look like sex if you're exhausted every night. It could be a hug. Okay. What does that look like for you? Ask her what she needs. I need you to be home by 8 o'clock so we can have time to connect. Okay, do we have to do it every night of the week? What if I promise to be home 4 nights by 8 o'clock? Okay, that will work. There are ways to meet people's needs and show them that you care and that you're listening and change your behavior in smaller ways than maybe what they're asking for. If you can do what they're asking for, great. But I recently had a conversation with someone who was struggling because when he gets home, he doesn't want to engage with anyone. And his partner misses him and just wants a little bit of physical interaction. It doesn't always have to be sex, although she likes a lot of that. But he's exhausted and he knows himself really well, and he knows that he needs space and quiet. So I said to him, could you offer her anything? Could you offer a hug and a kiss goodnight? Could you offer her 5 minutes of chest time to cuddle? Could you offer her 15 minutes? Doesn't have to be an hour-long cuddle session. Doesn't have to be sex. She's just asking you for physical connection when you get home. It doesn't even have to be right when you get home. She'd probably be happy if it's an hour later. But what you're saying is you just want to be left alone. Okay, but you're in a partnership. And she's telling you she wants to physically have contact with you. There's a compromise there. There are multiple compromises there that could work on any given night. And she'd probably be happy if you gave her an option 3 nights a week. Doesn't even have to be 7. So what I'm saying is listen to your wife if you're still in the marriage and you're hoping to salvage it. Listen to what she needs. She should do the same back for you, of course. If she's asking for things to change, how can they change? How can you show her that you care and make any change that will signal to her nervous system that there's safety? Because hearing without change is what she stopped believing in when she leaves. And if you're post-divorce and you're looking at this and realizing you're about to do this again with the next woman, notice that. Notice what your nervous system filters out. Notice what counts as fine in your internal accounting. Ask her if it's fine. Notice whether you're checking the logistics of love or the actual feeling underneath it. The way you'll not do this again is by not. The way you will not do this again is not by avoiding women. It's by becoming a different kind of listener. Most men leave this conversation feeling for the first time that something they've been carrying is either bad luck or instability is actually a knowable pattern. And they're like, oh, okay. It's not bad luck that all the relationships end or that you're going to end your 3rd marriage. It's a pattern, and if you know it, you can change it, right? There are knowable causes here. So this is the gift of this conversation for you, if you can stand in it and do the work. She was probably telling you, you were probably not equipped to hear it in a way that needed to be heard. But you can be equipped now. And if you want to keep doing this work, I'm at theloomlife.com. If you're in Florida, loomlifetherapy.com. I offer therapy on loomlife.com is my coaching business. The link to book discovery calls in the show notes. I have real conversations, and there's never any pressure to work with me, but oftentimes the first conversation really is helpful for people to figure out how to make the next step in their journey, right? These episodes are all really helpful for people who are going through it. I understand it's rough. That's why I started creating these episodes for men. Drop a comment if anything in this one landed for you, especially the men who recognize themselves in section 4. Other men are reading and they need to know that they are not alone. This was Pulling Threads. I'm Leslie. Take care of yourself.